Europe is trying to relearn power, not rhetorically, not symbolically, practically. For years, the European Union told itself that power came from rules, trade, and moral authority. Hard power was something outsourced, mainly to Washington. That arrangement worked as long as the United States behaved like a predictable hegemon. It no longer does. The recent confrontation over Greenland did not create this crisis. It exposed it. When the United States threatens tariffs to force a European country into a sovereign concession, the question is no longer about trade. It is about whether Europe can act like a sovereign political actor, or whether it remains structurally dependent. On paper, Europe has tools. Serious ones. The EU has the anti-coercion instrument. It has the single market. It has regulatory power that shapes global business models. It has financial weight. Europe is not weak, and yet Europe hesitates. Why? Because Ukraine is the leash holding Europe back. This is the central contradiction of European power today. Europe wants autonomy, but it is not yet autonomous. It wants to deter coercion, but it still depends on American security guarantees. Every escalation with Washington is filtered through one overriding fear. What happens to Ukraine if the United States disengages or turns transactional? That fear governs everything. This is why Europe responds to pressure with process, with legal reviews, with proportionality language, with diplomacy-first signaling. It is not cowardice. It is calculation under constraint. Compare this to China. China does not negotiate its sovereignty. When pressured, it retaliates. It absorbs short-term pain to establish long-term credibility. Markets understand this. Governments understand this. That is why China, whether liked or not, is respected as a power. Europe, by contrast, has spent decades avoiding confrontation. It compromises because compromise preserved stability in the old system. But the system has changed. The United States now applies pressure even to allies. Tariffs, threats, conditionality. Europe is being treated less like a partner and more like a variable. The EU's dilemma is that it understands this intellectually but cannot yet act on it strategically. Take the so-called trade bazooka. The anti-coercion instrument exists precisely for scenarios like this. Economic pressure used to force political outcomes. Greenland fits the definition cleanly, and yet the instrument remains unused. Why? Because once Europe fires it, the relationship with Washington fundamentally changes. It stops being managed tension and becomes open power politics. Europe knows that escalation would provoke retaliation, and retaliation would land in a moment of maximum vulnerability. A land war on the continent that Europe cannot yet sustain alone. This is where capital enters the story. Trade gets attention, but capital is where real leverage lives. Europe is the largest foreign holder of American assets, bonds, equities, pension flows. This gives Europe influence it rarely acknowledges, let alone uses. Crucially, this leverage does not require dramatic action. No dumping, no announcements, just marginal shifts, fewer purchases, more hedging, slightly different allocations. Markets react to direction, not drama. This is why American policymakers care deeply about long-term yields. The United States can always issue debt, but the price of that debt matters. Rising yields constrain domestic policy. They raise borrowing costs. They complicate inflation management. They turn foreign relations into financial variables. Europe knows this, but again it hesitates. Because leverage is only useful if you are willing to accept the consequences of using it. And here we return to Ukraine. As long as Ukraine depends on sustained American military, intelligence, and logistical support, Europe's freedom of action is limited. Strategic autonomy remains aspirational. Europe is rearming, but rearmament takes time. Factories, supply chains, budgets, political consensus. None of this moves at market speed. So Europe does what it has always done in moments of transition. It delays. It prepares. It signals without striking. It hopes pressure subsides before a decision becomes unavoidable. This works until it doesn't. The uncomfortable truth is that Europe is already in a power confrontation whether it likes it or not. Refusing to acknowledge that does not reduce the risk. It shifts the timing it's seeing. Every episode of coercion forces Europe to choose between credibility and caution. For now, caution wins because Ukraine makes the cost of miscalculation existential. But this balance will not hold forever. If pressure from Washington becomes structural rather than episodic, Europe will be forced to act, not out of pride, out of necessity. At that point, restraint becomes weakness, and weakness invites more pressure. Europe is not weak, it is unfinished. It has the tools of power but not yet the habit of using them. Ukraine delays Europe's transition into a sovereign actor, but it also accelerates the learning process. Every compromise teaches a lesson. Every hesitation narrows future options. The leash will not disappear overnight, but neither will the impulse to break it. The question is not whether Europe will act like a sovereign power. It is when it decides the cost of not acting is higher than the risk of acting. And that moment is getting closer. If you found this analysis useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps support deeper independent discussions on Europe, power and geopolitics without noise or slogans. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.